Morning, Rand. Well, it's a sad day to be an American, huh?
Well, I'm really disappointed in it. We've been talking for a year about, how not committing commerce or not being active in commerce can't be commerce. And, we won that argument, but we lost the war basically because they snuck out a new argument and said basically it's a tax, and apparently they don't think there are any limitations on tax. But, this fight's been going on a long time. Hamilton and Madison fought about it. Madison really felt that the tax and spend authority was limited by the enumerated powers. Basically, if there was not a power in the Constitution to do the activity, you couldn't simply tax for anything. It's sort of like saying you could have $1 million tax on guns. Well, if you had $1 million tax per gun, that's effectively prohibiting or coercing, people not to own guns, and
that's exactly. Look, that's exactly right. That's why, they had to have the 18th Amendment. They couldn't put a high tax on alcohol because that would stop people from drinking, but it would have been unconstitutional. So they needed the 18th Amendment. But it's interesting, Rand, you got to actually look at what the justices said in the majority opinion. It was written that the reason that the tax is okay is because it's not actually high enough to force anyone to buy insurance. If it was $1 million penalty, then they would have thrown it out. So they basically said it's okay because it's not going to work, because the penalty is so low that you don't have to buy insurance. You could just pay the penalty. And they actually said that even if you don't pay the penalty, the IRS can't take your money. So since there's no enforcement provisions, they basically put it through, which I think is ridiculous because they ignored the intent of the law, which was to punish you for not buying insurance, which should make it unconstitutional. But what really would bother me is, okay, so since the penalty is so low, right, they're going to have to raise the penalty in order to get people to buy insurance. But that means we have to take it all the way back up to the Supreme Court to find out if it's still constitutional.
Yeah, and the real problem here is the court is not ruling on whether or not there is an enumerated power. They're just ruling on whether or not the tax is excessive or reasonable or punitive. And that's getting into just deciding the degrees of the tax, which I don't think is a real issue. The real issue should be, does the Congress or does the Constitution enumerate a power for Congress to be in this activity? Interestingly, there was a case, back in the 30s, which is U.S. v. Butler, and the opinion, interestingly, was written by a Justice Roberts. It was a Justice Owen Roberts. And in it, he concluded, he struck down this tax, and he says, this tax is but a means to an unconstitutional end. So there was every reason you could have looked at this through the taxing authority and through U.S. v. Butler and said, look, it is a tax, and you are allowed to tax and spend, but you're only allowed to do it for something that is constitutional, and there's no constitutional prerogative or justification or enumerated power that says Congress should be forcing you to buy insurance.
Yeah, I mean, they should not be able to use the tax code to circumvent the Constitution. And it's up to the Supreme Court to look at the intent of the legislation and to rule it unconstitutional on that basis. I mean, it seems like the court tried to find some loophole with which to give Congress the authority to do something that it doesn't have the constitutional authority to do.
See, and Madison and Hamilton fought over this, and Madison said basically that if the general welfare clause meant nothing, if it meant you could do anything you wanted, why would we have taken the time to enumerate the 19 powers we gave to Congress? So really, this is the guy who wrote a lot of the Constitution. The guy that's considered to be the father of the Constitution is saying that the general welfare clause doesn't mean just anything that government can do. It's limited by the 19 powers, and one of the powers was not to force you to buy insurance.
And, I think another travesty of this decision is once they ruled it a tax, then it should have been unconstitutional as an unapportioned direct tax, because clearly a tax levied on all Americans who refuse to buy health insurance is a direct tax on those individuals and needs to be apportioned. And the Supreme Court redefined the meaning of the term direct tax to be any tax that not 100% of the population pays. According to them, as long as there's one person that's exempt, then it's no longer direct, which is complete nonsense.
Yeah, and the only silver lining to this whole thing, though, is I think it's going to galvanize people to go to the polls in November, and they're going to say, look, we don't want Obamacare, and we're going to vote to get rid of it. And so we'll see what happens, and whether or not the Tea Parties that had formed in 2009, whether or not you'll see a resurrection of those, and whether you'll see, larger and larger mass meetings who say, we're not going to stand for this. We're going to fight and try to change this through the ballot box.
Yeah, it is one more reason to vote for Romney is because the Supreme Court has now made the only hope of getting rid of it a repeal, and Obama is not going to sign that repeal.
Well, not only that, and repeal's difficult, but Romney has promised to give an immediate waiver through executive order. And now, while I'm not a big fan of executive order to add new government, but if it's an executive order to let you get away from government and avoid big government programs, I think I'd probably be in favor of that. The thing is,
particularly at the business level, if they can give businesses a waiver, that would be a great help.
Well, even whole states, businesses would be good, but even whole states would be even better because, there's probably 30 states with Republican governors that would probably accept a whole waiver for their whole state. Now, the way Obama has used it, I think, is actually unconstitutional because I think the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution says you have to treat every business equally. So how could it possibly be constitutional that McDonald's gets a waiver and Burger King doesn't? That's absurd. Or how can it be constitutional that 3 million union workers get it and non-union workers don't? Or how can it be constitutional that the restaurants that Nancy Pelosi frequents in San Francisco get it and the restaurants in Bowling Green don't?
Well, clearly, if that tax is an excise tax on businesses, it needs to be uniform. The Constitution says that it has to be applied equally. They can't discriminate and favor certain people. It's like if you vote for Obama, it doesn't apply to you, but if you vote for my opponent, then it does. I mean, you can't micromanage it to that level, but. What's the actual strategy now? I agree, and I mentioned this on my shows earlier. I think this does galvanize and give a winning issue to the Republicans or to some of these Senate campaigns. What's the attitude up there on Capitol Hill? How is everybody reacting to this?
Well, the House is going to have another vote on it, and they'll vote to repeal it probably again the week we come back from 4th of July. So about a week from now, they'll vote again and repeal it. Harry Reid's not going to let that vote occur in the Senate. And if it took place, we would lose. But it'll keep it in the public forefront and let people know that, we're still going to keep fighting this battle. But ultimately, the battle's only won now in November. The court case is over. I still maintain it's unconstitutional. The court has concluded. But, the liberal blogosphere is saying, well, you can't call it unconstitutional because it's decided. I say, well, ask Justice Scalia today. Does he still believe it's unconstitutional?
Yeah, that's what doesn't make sense to me. You've got 4 justices that say it's unconstitutional. Why are they wrong? Just because, I said, what if the other 5 justices were a bunch of third graders? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, those other justices, most of them, know nothing about the Constitution. They just have a liberal agenda, and they're there to rubber stamp whatever big government programs are passed. And the law is just as unconstitutional. But, in my opinion, since the court basically said that the government doesn't have the power to force you to buy health insurance, and 5 justices agreed that they didn't have that power, then it is unconstitutional because they can't do through the tax code what they don't have the power to do legislatively. And the fact that the justices think, well, okay, the tax is so low that it's not really going to do anything, because under this bill, you could say, well, the government could pass a law requiring you, to buy broccoli. And they would have to say, well, only if the tax was low enough so that didn't actually make you buy broccoli. So I don't think it changes anything. It's still unconstitutional, but it shows you how important these justices are. I mean, that's another reason to maybe vote for Romney, because maybe one of these justices will retire and we can get somebody in that actually will enforce the Constitution and do their job.
But it also shows how difficult it is in picking a justice. A Republican president picked Roberts also, and there's been high hopes for Roberts. and he ended up siding with the 4 liberal judges on basically giving unlimited tax and spending authority, really not saying that there's, I'm not sure from his decision what are the limits to the tax and spending authority. He basically says he defers to Congress. He says that you elect a Congress and they decide what the tax and spending authority is. I don't think that's really, that's showing no judicial review. That's not showing that he's going to say the Constitution has limits on our power, and that's, unlimited government is not what we need.
The power to tax is not absolute. There are restraints on Congress's power to tax. And, it is not up to the Supreme Court to be a rubber stamp. I don't care how popular a bill is. I don't care if it's unanimously voted on. If it's unconstitutional, they got to strike it down.
Absolutely. And you had even the president weighing in before this case saying, well, it's passed by a majority. It should be respected. Well, what if the majority took away the First Amendment or the Second Amendment? Should we let that stand? No, we still have another shot at this, and I think we have a real good shot in the fall, and we just have to keep fighting for this. And the debate.
Well, how do we know they didn't? We don't even know that they didn't take it away. Look, what if the government wants to pass a tax on radio talk show hosts? What if they want to say, what if the tax is so high that all the radio talk show programs have to shut down? I mean, basically, is there really any free speech or freedom of the press? Because if the government could just tax an activity, they can tax it out of existence. So, does anything else matter? If you say their power to tax is unlimited, they can pretty much do whatever they want. They could use the tax code to force you to do anything they want, to prevent you to do anything they want. The whole Bill of Rights goes out the window if you accept the premise that taxing power is unlimited.
And the question also would be then, what happens? Is a $2,000 tax on radio hosts okay and $2 million wrong? Is it only degrees of coercion that make a difference, or can you really just not coerce behavior? And I think if this were a First Amendment case and we were talking about a special tax on those who make political comments, even if we're $100, don't you think the left would be squawking saying, we're not going to tolerate a $100 tax on opinion writers or opinion speakers? And I think
that depends. If it was me, they would tolerate it. If it was just pointed at Peter Schiff, they'd be all in favor of it.
That's right. Some of the left has come back and now is in favor of the fairness doctrine. So, but I think the war's not over. This has been going on a long time, and while I'm disappointed, it also gives me the energy to say, elections have consequences, and so we're going to work hard in November to see if we can get somebody new in the White House and keep fighting this case. And the thing is I still think Wickard v. Filburn was unconstitutional when they told a guy who chose not to sell his wheat, they said they could regulate how many acres of wheat he could grow. And so that's from 1942. So any of these liberal blogospheres say I can't go around saying things are unconstitutional. I'm still arguing about cases from the 40s. So,
well, there are. Look, there is a lot of bad precedent. I mean, just because a court makes the mistake, it doesn't mean that they're correct, right? I mean, if the court ruled that the moon is made of green cheese, am I supposed to accept, well, I guess it must be true because 5 Supreme Court justices said it was true. I mean, I could read the Constitution, right? You don't have to be a so-called scholar recognized by somebody. I could read English, right? And I know what the Constitution means, and I know this is unconstitutional. And I know that there were a lot of things that were held unconstitutional during the New Deal. And, Roosevelt threatened to pack the court if the justice didn't confirm his bills, and they ultimately caved. But the whole NRA was thrown out. There were plenty of things that were thrown out, but the things that weren't thrown out, I think, were just as unconstitutional. It's just that the Supreme Court caved into the political pressure and approved the stuff anyway.
You're exactly right. Well, I'm getting buzzed. I got to run to vote, but we'll do it again, Peter.
All right, Rand, thanks for stopping by. Keep on fighting a good fight. We got a commercial break. We'll be right back. The Peter Schiff Show continues, so don't miss a minute.
The Peter Schiff Show.